All right. Life after Drew Brees. Life after Drew Brees. I don't think it's going to be as awesome as our Who Dat Nation listeners think it's going to be, but okay. But I don't have the fandom hat on. So I love New Orleans, the city. I like the Saints. And I absolutely loved watching Drew Brees perform and compete. But I think, a kind of a correction's coming for Who Dat Nation. Out of Bounds, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN. This segment's brought to you by Sound and Communications, the leader in audio and visual equipment for churches, conference rooms, schools, universities, businesses. SoundcomAV.com. AV systems for your businesses, your churches, and facilities in Mississippi. Sound and Communications. SoundcomAV.com. We welcome in Saints Insider, WWL Radio TV New Orleans. He is Mike Detillier, on the Modelo guest line. Mike, I know it's early. A lot of things could happen. What's as far as on the offensive side of the football, the offense and the quarterback position, what was your one big takeaway after the first exhibition game?
Saints moved the football up and down the field, but you can't survive on 6 turnovers. 6 turnovers, 10 penalties. You're not winning that. The shocking thing for me was they were, in range to win the game at the end. They still had a shot. That to me is unbelievable. But offensively, they ran the football really well, and each of the quarterbacks, all 3 of them, had their moments and then had uneven moments also. But, they were able to move the football up and down the field on the Ravens. And just it didn't matter the points because of the fact that, again, 6 turnovers is really difficult to overcome at that point. But, I've always felt it hasn't changed my mind from when training camp started that Jameis Winston's the guy. Because I think in this way, Sean can still use Taysom Hill as a weapon on the offensive side of the football. As a runner, receiver, on special teams, you name it, and still utilize him. And, it's all about finding a way to win. It's nothing. You get no extra for style points. You just figuring out a way to win. And without Michael Thomas, probably until October, you got to find a way to put your best playmakers on the field. And I think the best way to do it is to have Jameis be quarterback and Taysom play that role that he has played for the last couple of years and expand it.
Mike Detillier on the Modelo guest line, talking Saints and Who Dat. Okay, what?
Because, Bo, let me just throw this. I think every coach who says there's a quarterback battle, in the back of his mind, he knows who the guy's going to be.
Sure.
That's just great for the media and fans to buy into. But I think in the back of Coach Payton's mind or anybody else who's got that, they really know who's the guy. Now, again, you got to figure out a way to win now. With your offensive line is really good,
yeah,
but you don't have a big-time weapon with Michael Thomas out of the lineup. Certainly there are some glimpses there that Marquez Callaway, Deontay Harris can help you in that field, but Deontay's probably going to have a couple game suspension for an off-the-field incident. So, now everything's on Alvin Kamara. So you're going to see a lot of 8-man fronts. You're going to see a lot of press coverage. So that's why that thought for me was before training camp started that Taysom's got to be on the field, but not necessarily at quarterback.
Okay. What is the latest on Michael Thomas?
Well, he was at the game, and, apparently him and Sean have had a conversation. Sean won't talk about it, but at least they had some conversations and tried to mend that fence that was there. And Michael's more valuable to the Saints than he is to any other team. And all this trade talk is stupidity. There's people that don't understand the financial situation that they committed to Michael Thomas. If they would trade him, it would have a salary cap hit of almost $9 million, 8.8. Next year, $22 million. So explain to me, because, we got a lot of people, just trade him off. Okay, this isn't 1975. Just trade him off.
Right.
That there is a financial situation you have to understand here. That you made that commitment to Mike, and you got to try to make the best of it now. Now, again, with Mike, he got paid, and everything is what it is.
And he hadn't produced since.
And, last year was difficult because of what happened with the injury. And he wasn't healthy last year.
Right.
After game one. Just wasn't healthy. So I'm going to cut him some slack there. Because if you're not healthy and, you're not the same player. But he is a valuable part of this football team because of his ability to move the chains, move the sticks. The records show just how good he is. And Sean understands he's got nobody else. This stuff about next man up. Yeah, next man, but the next man ain't close to him. Okay? And people starting to have some realization the same way with Drew Brees about next man up. It's not about talent. It's about how these guys can produce and find a way to make something happen on the field. And so that situation has to be clear between Michael Thomas and Sean Payton. And I think they have at least made inroads with that. And he was on the sidelines for the Saints-Ravens game. He's rehabbing in Philly. And so that's a good sign for the Saints. And hopefully he can be back for sometime in October. Just remember, this football team and some of the best Saints teams I've seen, and certainly we're not talking about a ton of them, but throughout the years, but over the last 5 years, the Saints have been 12-9 in the month of September, which means some of the best Saints teams have not gotten off to great starts. But you know what they've been over the last 5 years in October? 17-1.
Wow.
So my thing is, man, those first few games really mean a lot to this football team because Sean has shown after a while that team's hitting stride in October, and 17-1 over 5 years is strong. And in the month of November, they've been 17-5.
Oh, okay, that is.
Which is really good, too. So, again, that first month is so critical, and you can see what you won't have. You won't have Onyemata. You won't have Michael Thomas. Most likely you're looking at a suspension for Marshawn Lattimore and Deontay Harris. And Will Lutz won't be there either at place kicker. So you're looking for another kicker there also. So, man, listen, you got to find a way to win those first 4 games, which will be difficult for this football team.
Oh. Mike Detillier on the Out of Bounds Show, brought to you by Sound and Communications. Saints in transition. Brees retires. Michael Thomas, with a late surgery, will not be back until maybe October-ish, and then trying to figure it out in some other spots. As Mike said, some key guys could face suspension too. With Michael Thomas, the star wide receiver for the Saints, Sean's a big boy and Michael's a big boy, and this is all a business. So do you feel like they're already on the same page and are starting to put whatever happened in the spring behind them, Mike?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I really believe that. And I'm a big believer, listen, you can sit down and hash this out. And it may never be the same between the two, but you know what? You can maybe make it a little better because, I'm hearing the player side. He's hearing my side. what one of the things Mike's got to realize too, and Mike's always been fueled by the fact that so many teams passed on him, and the Saints picked him in round two. My thing is, Mike's got to realize the Saints did draft him. They put him in a scheme that basically highlighted him
No doubt.
and paid him. That's even more. Man, listen, Ed Reed always tells me this. He has his camps here every year. And they told me, I don't know, I think I know why, but he always say, hey, Cookie, he said, let me tell you something. He said, you know how you get respect in this league? They pay you. I said, that's the ultimate respect. He said, this is a business where there's no respect on either side for player and organization. Loyalty, like you said, they can throw that out real quick. But he said, how much they respect you, they pay you. So Mike got paid the ultimate part of respect in this league. And so Mike's got to understand that too. That you got could you get and put in a better spot than to work with Drew Brees and Sean Payton those years.
Hey, Mike, we're kind of switching gears just for a second. You mentioned Ed Reed, who's from that area and played at Miami and is a great player with the Ravens. And I've always heard people, talk about his alpha and leadership skills. As someone who has been around some big-time players who are also locker room leaders and so on, tell me a little bit about why Ed Reed is so special, not just as a player, but as a locker room guy.
Because I knew how he grew up, and it was difficult. And he always felt that God had kind of blessed him and given him that ability to play, and that he wanted to pass that along to other guys. And when you were a rookie or you first went to the Ravens, he was your guide. And I know this for a fact. Ladarius Webb, a young man from Alabama who started out at Southern Miss, ended up at Nicholls State, and played, I think, 8 or 9 seasons in the NFL with the Ravens, told me when he got picked, Ed Reed sat him down, and they talked, and he said, not one word about football. Life. Watch your money. Watch who you hang around with. If you got any questions about anything, you can call me any time of the day or night. I'll help you out. And if you need help here with something, I'm going to help you. And Ladarius was, man, I've never been around anybody like that before. Never. And he said, guys respected Ed. And he talked about an incident that one of the guys passed and threw a towel that didn't hit the bin, a towel bin, and it kind of bounced off and fell down, and he walked away. And Ed Reed got on him, on that player, about, hey, you respect this house. Pick that towel up and put it in the bin. And I don't ever want to see you do it again. This is how we do things here. If you throw tape on the floor, you better pick it up and put it in that trash bin.
I love that.
Well, was like, man, because he said, I don't want to say the name, but the guy was a pretty big guy. And he said, Ed, he's 200 pounds. And he said, he confronted him. And he said, here's the best part. There was other guys that stood up. And if that guy would have got, in Ed Reed's face, he said, I think he might have found himself in a battle that he wasn't going to win. And he said, he picked it up, picked the towel up, put it in there. And he said, I never saw that towel back on that floor. Towels on the floor.
I bet.
He said that was Ed's way of telling everybody, hey, you're going to do things this way and respect this team, the players here, and this organization. And he said, Mike, it was unbelievable to hear him talk. When he gave a speech, and he said it wasn't often, but when he gave a speech, everybody listened. He said, just like Ray Lewis. When Ray Lewis talked, everybody listened. When Ed talked, everybody listened. But he said the craziest thing I ever was involved with, so I was a second-year guy, and I'm watching film with Ed Reed, and Ed Reed could tell a route by the way the guy put his hands on his hips or in the front of his pants. He said, watch, he's going to run this route because he's got his hands parked in front of him. When he puts it to the side, it's a different route. And said, you go back in the film, and that's exactly, he said, that's how detailed Ed Reed was. He said it was almost like having a coach on the field, and he said Ed took a lot of chances as a football player. Guys, he said, couldn't get away with that, in certain situations. Guys, maybe better athletes than Reed.
Right.
Could not get away with it, but he was so smart, and he could bait you. But he said it was all that film work of, guy got that hand on the side while he's running a corner route. If he puts it in front of him, watch, he's going to cross the middle. And Webb was like, damn, I come from Nicholls State. We didn't do all this. We watched a little bit of film, but we didn't see this. He said he was so detailed about it, and he watched the quarterback, and he said, man, him and Peyton Manning, they would go at it and jawing at each other the entire game. And he said, I saw it happen when we played the Colts, that Ed Reed was calling the Colts plays. He would come up to the line of scrimmage, and he was actually calling the plays. And he said it drove Manning. It drove Manning up the wall.
Talking about two lions.
You talk about two alpha males and both almost like two tigers sort of growling at one another from different cages. And he said, Mike, it was unreal. And he said, you could see it really aggravated Peyton. No matter what he tried to do, Ed could call the play. And I found it so funny that this is years afterwards. Drew Brees was with Bobby Hebert and I, and he was telling us, and I told him the story about Ed Reed, and he said, you know who does that to me? Luke Kuechly. He said he actually calls out plays. He said, I line them up, and he said, I try to adjust, and Kuechly's calling the play.
God.
He said that's how good, Kuechly was. And he said, what are you going to do when it's that late and you're trying to adjust? And he said, that's what got on Peyton Manning's nerves. He said, Mike, I'm telling you, Ed was probably waiting until right before the snap, and you can't readjust at that point, and then he calls the play. And he said, that's what gets on Peyton Manning's nerves. He said, you know what? Luke Kuechly does the exact same thing to me. He waits until the play is almost ready to happen, and then he calls it out, and bang. What are you going to do? You can't jump out of the play at that point.
No. And as much as Peyton Manning and Drew Brees, as much and as hard as they prepare, that had to drive them nuts, Mike D.
I think more Manning than Brees, because Brees was like, you know what? I would almost sort of give him some dummy signals to see if he'd fall for it, but he said, it never happened. He said, but Manning wouldn't do it because he said, I think he always thought he could outsmart him. He could outsmart him. And he baited him because Ed tells the story about Manning had made a kind of double kind of disconnect of a play. And he said, I knew exactly what he was doing. So he said, I ran up to the line of scrimmage. I called the play, and then he said, I'll peel back. And he said, sure enough, Manning tried to hit a big play, and Reed intercepted it.
Wow.
In essence, it was almost like you playing in somebody's backyard. Manning had a signal to the receiver, and he said it was Brandon Stokely. He said he had a deal where he had told Stokely, if he calls the play, run this route. And he said, I knew that's what he was going to do. So he said, I ran up to the line of scrimmage, I called the play, and then he said, I kicked it in reverse. He said, sure enough, he hit me dead in between the numbers, the pass. And he said, man, he was living. And he was living about, that I knew what he was trying to do. And he said it just absolutely drove him nuts.
What a super smart player and big-time leader for the Baltimore Ravens. Won a national championship with
And he was not a super highly recruited football player. I'm going to be honest with you. I always thought he was going to Houston.
Okay.
University of Houston.
So LSU and was that the end of DiNardo, Mike, that had a shot at him?
Yeah, and the family members knew that Jerry was slippery. It was on the slippery trail. And so at this point, he was starting to heat up a little bit in recruiting in between his junior and senior year. And he told me, he said, right now, he said, I'll probably go to Houston. Because Houston had a connection here in the Bayou River Parish area. And then all of a sudden, I see Curtis Johnson, who is now the receivers coach for the Saints. And he was the receivers coach for Miami of Florida back then. Curtis went to St. Charles Catholic, which is about 3 miles from Detillier. And I said, okay, I know exactly where he's going now. And they got him to go there. And but LSU was in the mix sort of late, but they got in late in the process.
I got you.
And so, Ed at that point was, man, listen, if you didn't want to bring me to the dance early, why you come and ask me after somebody else turned you down?
And, Mike, Miami was still hot then. They're not as hot now.
What's the wording? Oh, my God, because you think about the players they got from here. Not only Ed, but Reggie Wayne, they got from here. They came close because Ed Orgeron almost got Marshall Falk. Ed should have lied to Marshall, but he didn't do it. Marshall said, I wanted to play running back. But Miami of Florida had lost their 4 starting defensive backs. Marshall Falk was a really good defensive back in high school. And Ed told him, listen, the best chance for you to play, we have 3 returning running backs, but we don't have anybody in the secondary, is for you to come here and play free safety. And Marshall was, man, I don't know about that, coach. I love Miami, but, I want to play running back. Now, Ed should have – I think they would have figured it out within about 2 minutes. Marshall Falk plays running back. But Ed wouldn't lie to him. And he told him, listen, we want you as a secondary guy. He said, damn it, Mike, I should have lied to him. He said, I know you would have, but he said, I couldn't because he said, listen, I'm coaching on defense, and we need defensive backs.
For our listeners, Ed Reed is the chief of staff for Manny Diaz for the Miami Hurricanes, and Manny seems to believe that he's going to have a heck of a future in coaching. It'll be interesting to see if, one, he decides to go on the field at some point and if he stays with it. He doesn't have to financially, but he may want to do it. Mike, we may have to do this. I mean, we will do it again next Tuesday. We have to jump back into that. Thank you so much, buddy. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, Bo.
Mike Detillier, WWL Radio TV New Orleans, on the Out of Bounds show with great stories. Ed Reed from New Orleans to the Miami Hurricanes to the Baltimore Ravens, Super Bowl champion in the Hall of Fame. Brought to you by Sound and Communications. For any AV system, audio-visual, for your business, church, facility, soundcomav.com. Soundcom.